Hey, welcome to Wolf's Watch. I'm Wolf. Thanks for being part of the conversation. This is 21st Century TV, right? Interactive, back and forth. Post your questions in the comments as you're watching this. Want to hear your comments as well. What's your insights? This is about us moving forward together. This is about bringing information. As one of the leaders of the pack, I'm scouring the countryside looking for the food that feeds your leadership development to scale your company. Today, want to talk about reality, about inflation, and more. Look, here's the thing. If if we were still calculating inflation based on the way it used to be, the government changes it. So this is something about reality. Reality is your friend. When you look at data sets, a lot of times you need to compare data, right? As a business leader, it's like, how are things going? Trends moving forward. If you're looking at the growth of your company over a period of time, what happens if the data halfway through changed so that the way that it's calculated for the second half of the data, the second half of the year is completely disconnected from the first half of the year? Can you still compare those? Well, if you know what the difference is. So we've got something to talk about on that. First off, I want to talk about perception. Perception is everything. I just Perception is everything. Here's something to consider. On this day, I'm a fan of history. I hated history in school because, as one of my mentors recently pointed out, it was taught on this day, on this date, this person did this thing. And it's like, so what? What are the lessons? What's the context? What's the richness of it? So on this day in 19, I'm going to put my glasses on to make sure I'm not feeding the wrong info. On this day in 1923, King Tut's tomb was opened. Now, there's a huge story of perception in this. So here's a photo courtesy of onthisday.com. So here's a photo of the person that opened it and the sponsor. Not going to get into the names. You can go to onthisday.com to look that up, because the important thing here is the story of what happened at the opening of the tomb. So they opened the tomb on this day. You can see this photo. That's right, 1923, February 16th. In November, the preceding November, a small hole up in the corner of the wall that was protecting the tomb, that sealed the tomb closed, just a small hole was knocked in, big enough to be able to let some light in and to look in. And now, in fairness, let's get some proper names here for you. So as the light was filtering in, the person looking in, someone asked you, "Can you see anything?" And the response was, "As my eyes are adjusting to the light, yes, I can see objects." And it's like, oh my gosh, there's gold everywhere. By being able to see through a small hole in what was considered to be just another massive stone wall in the larger crypt, the larger area that they were excavating, led them into the actual tomb to Tutankhamun. And once they fully, were able to fully open that wall up, here is what they found. Now, bear with me. This ties in to your scaling your business today. So here's what they found, right? Gold everywhere, but also the mummy of King Tut in the sarcophagus that had been sealed in for thousands of years. Small perception change, right? A relatively small hole in what proved to be a door, not a wall, not a stone wall, impenetrable stone wall. Enough light filtered in to be able to see some, not well, but see some in the darkness. Eye adjusts to the light. So it was a chain of shifts in perception that led to the statement, "There's gold everywhere." Now, how does that apply to what you're doing? Shifts in perception are crucial for scaling your business, to be able to see what's going on, to be able to look at the marketplace differently, to look at to listen to, respond to, analyze differently what your current customers are telling you, what your prospective customers are telling you, so that you can find that opportunity to outserve your competition, right? To provide value that they aren't getting and get paid well for it. So perception is huge. Now, consider this. Consider this. I've got a little more show and tell for you. Hang with me. So here's a square, right? Squares are boring. Mostly, it's so boring that squares are people that are buttoned down, wear collared shirts that are all buttoned up, buttoned down collar, and or is just so not very exciting, not very adventurous, not risk taking so much. They have their hair cut very short, beards not worn, but if they are, trimmed tightly. So just, very quiet people. Squares, right? Versus what? Versus the players, right? So consider this though. What happens? And this is still talking about perception. Now, bear with me here. So, what happens if you take a square and rotate it 90 degrees? You got a diamond, right? So, what's the value of a square? And I'm not an artist, so don't be sending me hate mail about my lack of artistic value, ability here, or the square is not a perfect square. You're missing the point. What's the value of a square if you rotate that 90 degrees? If I can find, where's the, you can tell the engineer, right? Where's the on button? You rotate that 90 degrees, which isn't a massive change. It's not doing a complete 180, not flipping completely in the opposite direction, not doing completely around the world, 360-degree spin. Becomes a 90-degree shift. 1/4 of 4 rotations, a square becomes a diamond. What's the value of the diamond compared to the square, right? So it's those, how do you do that kind of shift? Now, we're talking about, let me get this on the right screen. So we're talking about moving one step of 4, right? In terms of rotating a square. You start with a square, you rotate it 90 degrees. So there's four movements 90 degrees, right? Seems obvious, but I just want to painfully spell this out for you. You got a diamond. That's just one step of 4. Small hinge swings the big door, right? That small, relatively 25% shift in perception when you consider 360-degree rotation, right? Because we're rotating 90 degrees, makes a massive difference. So how are you doing that in your business? What's the seemingly impenetrable stone wall that actually, with a shift in perception, becomes realized as a doorway into something completely different, behind which there's gold everywhere, just as they found in opening Tutankhamun's tomb. And the thing about perception, there's a legend that goes along with Tutankhamun's tomb, right? That everybody died because of the curse of the mummy and the curse of the pharaoh. After that, well, 10 years after opening the tomb, only 8 people out of the 58 people that were involved with excavating Tutankhamun's tomb had passed away. And most of those were not within the first 12 months even. So consider that, yet that legend still stays. We make movies about it that are very entertaining, but is that really, is that actually the reality? Or is it not? What's the reality of your situation? And that comes back to what we're talking about with the numbers. If you're comparing numbers from the beginning of the year, or even 5 years, 10 years back, when you're looking at the growth of your business, key metrics, your KPIs, right? Key performance indicators in your business, if you are moving along and then halfway through, let's just leave it to a year. So let's say you're looking at 2021, you're starting out and you're tracking, and then all of a sudden, the way that those numbers are analyzed changes, so that the same basis is here, right? You're up here, things are tracking along, you're getting really good performance, and all of a sudden you change how you calculate, and it's like, oh, wait a minute. Well, if it's a lesser is good, then that's fine. So let's take inflation numbers. We've been talking a lot about inflation for the last 8 months now. It is currently at 9% for producers, and it is, you know, flirting with getting over 8%, 6, 7, 8% for consumers, based on the numbers that are published by Bureau of Labor Statistics, federal government. Well, here's something that happened, and then every so often the government, the way those numbers are calculated changes. So if we go back, one of the things with today's numbers, it's the highest it's been since 1982. Right. Well, there was a change in how the numbers were calculated in 1980 and then again in 1990. So there's these breaks in continuity. They're constantly making adjustments in how these numbers. So we need to be aware of that. If we use the exact same method that was used in 1980, and we've got some show and tell to go with that. If we use the exact same method that was used in 1980, the actual interest rate would be almost 16%, not interest. I'm sorry. Actual inflation rate would be almost 16%. So let's take a look at that. Let's see what we got. Come here. Where are you? Inflation charts. So here's what it would look like. Here's the big peak back in early 1980s, when inflation peaked at just a little over 16% before it finally started to, before we finally got it under control collectively, right? So it's business, government, banks, everybody working together on that. And then here we are now. If this were calculated the same way, this is where we would be today with interest rates. But instead, the data set that we're given is, yeah, look how high it was now, but it's bad now, but it's not as bad. Why is this important? Two reasons. And this ties into reality is your friend. You got to have the reality, or as Jim Collins termed the coin, the Stockdale paradox, right? You need to be able to confront reality, no matter how brutal the facts, so that you can move forward towards your goal. You're not letting go of your goal. You just are. You can't get to here if you don't know where here is, right? There's this. You feeling me here? You understanding this? You got to know where you're at realistically in order to make progress. Taiichi Ono from Toyota said, where there's no measurement, there can be no progress. So you got to know where you're at, have a realistic assessment of where you're at, because look, 7% is bad. 3% inflation is the target, right? 2%, 3% is the Federal Reserve target. So when we're talking 6+%, that's not good. That's double. So that's harmful, right? You need to take actions on that. But if it's 12%, that requires different urgency, right? And some different responses. If it's at 20, 25%, that requires something different yet. So knowing where that is actually at allows priority of action, priority of severity, and being able to do it. So that reality, that basis in reality in order to move forward is crucial. And when there's breaks in the data like that, it can be misleading. Don't allow that to happen in the numbers that you're using to manage your business. And you got to know your numbers, right? If you don't know your numbers, you wouldn't have the size company that you have now. And it's just it messes with perception too, right? Because now you adjust perception. You think you're looking at a diamond, but it's really a square, right? It messes perception in a negative way if the numbers aren't correct. Now, there's imperfection in all numbers. We've talked about this in past episodes. There's imperfection in all numbers. They need to be consistent, right? Even if they're consistent, at least you can use them for trending across time, because most of the time it's really the trend that's more important. Knowing most measurements to 3 decimal places is a useless exercise. For one, most of the time it's impossible to measure with that much precision anyway. And second thing is, you don't need that to make decisions, right? In statistics, when we're doing hardcore statistical analysis, when we're doing design of experiments analysis, a lot of times there's a tendency to, we want to look at 95+% certainty on the results of our data. In business, what are you really working with? When I went to work for Hughes Aircraft, they had a mantra. They said, if you're right 40% of the time, you're a hero. If you're right 2/3 of the time, 60% of the time, you walk on water. Right? And these were the best systems engineers in the world at the time, right? that had that mantra because there's a lot of risk in business. You don't that level of precision, you'll miss the opportunity because speed of action is also very important. That's a bonus point for you today. So what's more likely? Perhaps maybe 60% certainty, because that's a massive difference to go from 60% to 95%. So most of the time, it's that we don't need that level of precision in order to make a decent decision, especially when you are tracking the right key performance indicators, when you're tracking the right set of data, the right set of indicators, because that paints a picture for you, right? You know whether you got the Mona Lisa or whether you're looking at the Mona Lisa or whether you're looking at dogs playing cards. So this is a problem in terms of data, and this is why also we've been talking so much about inflation, because the real inflation rate, as you're experiencing it, is at least two times higher than what's being published in the data that you're seeing in media. You know that's experience that creates a gap, creates a break in reality that makes it harder to make the right decisions. So thank you to I forgot to put that up, didn't I? So that was courtesy of shadowstats.com. You know what? I highly recommend going to shadowstats.com for more on this, to do a deeper dive in the numbers, why it's and also why it's important. Now, moving on to how this ties into perception. If you are adjusting your perception and saying, okay, we need to get to here from here to seize this opportunity, if the data is all over the board, if it's unreliable, if it is completely, there's no connection between past and present and future, then you can't track your KPIs. So you're not going to be able to navigate, which is hugely important. You can't adjust to the scene. I'm checking my notes here to make sure I'm giving you all the good stuff that are planned for you today. So another thing about perception is, how do you make that shift in perception? What do you do to shift your perception? Ever been bungee jumping? So this is one of the things that I like, that as part of our Adventure CEO series of events. Jump off a bridge with me. Trust me, the discussion we have over lunch will be different than the one we had at breakfast in terms of what you perceive as possible. I know it sounds crazy. If that's not your thing, consider it. Retired Navy SEAL Jocko Willink made a comment that just made me go, yeah, of course. He goes, look, you really, he recommends that everybody do something, and not just once, but do it from the time and again. Do something that has risk of injury or possibly even worse, because of the effect that it has on you psychologically, but also physiologically. And bungee jumping is, so I jumped with Bungee America. Highly recommend them. The reason I did that is they have been jumping at the same site since 1989 for every weekend, and they have a pristine safety record, no accidents, no deaths. And the hike out to where they jump is a different story. I've got a fun story for you on that. But they're good at what they do. They have a high safety record, and doing something like that, it's still an amazing experience. So consider doing that, or another activity. How about going to the north rim of Grand Canyon? That's another. I've been there. We did a motorcycle trip, and we've got some video on a segment that will be coming out on that. Being able to ride a motorcycle up to the edge of the Grand Canyon, stop and have breakfast. Not breakfast, we ate lunch actually, but if you're there early enough, you could have breakfast. But being able to stop and sit overlooking the canyon and the network of tributaries feeding into the canyon, while having lunch and talking with the people that were there. In our case, it was a family trip. My brother and his wife went in. It's just no way to put it in words. But again, it affects the perception, right? When you look at that, and it's like, man, oh man, talk about feeling small. And I don't mean insignificant as a person, right? As a person, every individual is significant. What I mean is feeling small in terms of the massive size of the Grand Canyon. It'd be like space travel, right? It's having a perspective in terms of going, okay, man, look at this, right? And there's so many lessons that can be gleaned from that. We'll leave that for the segment on the Grand Canyon. But what are you doing? Who do you hang out with? That's part of shifting perception, right? Are you hanging out with people that are thinking like that are looking at things differently, or is it the same thing over and over and over again? Right? Do you go to masterminds? Do you have a peer group that you talk to? Do you have a board of advisors that helps? That sometimes, and I don't know about you, but sometimes I need somebody or a group of somebodies that are way wiser than I am, have achieved a lot more than I am. They can just grab me by the hand and go, "Oh, look over here!" Right? And there's like, "Oh, wow, look at that! There's gold everywhere!" Right? Because of that shift in perception. But who do you hang out with? Who do you associate with? Where do you go for that kind of information to be able to shift the perception like that in order to see the opportunities that you can seize so you can scale your business? And I'll leave you with this thought. I almost forgot, because if you watched our recent episode where we interviewed Clinton Swain, had him on, and he's got an event coming up. So people like Clinton Swain that he is tops in the world he is the leading expert in the world on experiential training. And he puts people in training environments where they are deeply impactful. The training is about acquiring new skills. It's about changing behaviors. And that's another form of, how do you need to work on yourself and on your business. How do you change your perception? How do you get new stuff into your DNA, right? So that you are leading effectively in the direction that you see the opportunities in for your company. And I've put Clinton's link up. We talked about this coming up in March. They have Play to Win, free 3-day training all day long, each day. So imagine that. How much value he offers that he can give away a free 3-day training up front. And I highly recommend it. I've been through it multiple times. Not going to be able to make this session or unless something changes on our calendar. Uh, but I have been to it multiple times and get something more out of it each time. Who do you hang out with that has that kind of effect on your perception? It just makes you go, okay, mind blown they're saying, hashtag mind blown, as they're saying these days. Who Who do you hang out with that helps you do that? What do you do that just absolutely makes you look at things different? First whitewater rafting trip I went on, had that experience the evening afterwards, after spending a day on a very exciting river. And it just the possible seemed different. It reframed the possible, right? Took that square, turned it into a diamond, and we were going, man, there is gold everywhere. Expanded what we thought we could achieve. Who do you hang out with that does that for you? What activities do you engage in that does that for you, facilitates that? And here's a closing thought. What are you going to do this week to have that impact on you, that has that effect on you? Put it in the comments. I want to read about it and see what the various things are. For me, it was just I have 2 mastermind groups that I'm participating in this week. And one of them was right before this broadcast. And I tell you what, people are on fire. Stuff's happening. I'm looking at stuff going, oh, yes. Boom. I got one of those, those little gold nuggets. It goes, okay, boom, here's a shift. Turn a diamond, turn a square into a diamond. So again, what are you going to do this week that helps you with that shift in perception so you can scale your business? You can. You can add another zero to what you're doing, right? And you should, because as an entrepreneur, you're having a massively positive impact on the community you serve, the people that are working with you, your team, and on your family. So thanks for being part of Wolf's Watch. I'm Wolf, and I'll see you on the trail.